behalf of the Church of Religious Science today, who is sponsoring our speaker, Father Matthew Fox, is making his return debut to the Greer Garson Theater. I'm trying to figure out how many years ago that you came and spoke. Do you recall? 8, 10
I don't,
years
but
ago?
I've been in Santa Fe kind of regularly once in a while, so many times, always good experiences.
And then I heard you at the Ministries Congress. I'm afraid it was just 2 days after your father's passing.
Really?
Very powerful.
I remember
sharing.
that. Yeah, and some wonderful dancing, Indian dancing, with the butterfly dance. I remember that.
That was great. So welcome back to Santa Fe. I want to thank you for coming. And our show is The Art of Healing in Santa Fe. And so we're particularly interested in those areas of your remarks today that will reflect upon the healing of people, the planet, species, all those kinds of things. I wonder if you could share with us a few comments, give us a little teaser for what you're going to say.
Well, of course, grief work is, as you say, so important today at so many levels of our culture. We all going through it. And grief, of course, has three dimensions to it. First is anger. So we have to find rituals and ways to let people into their anger and let the anger express itself. And then when you can do the anger work, then you go deeper into the sorrow. Sorrow is deeper than anger, and that's, of course, a big part of grief. And then the third level of grief is bottoming out, is transcendence, is moving on, letting go even of that. So I think it's very important that we honor all three of those levels, the anger, the sorrow, and the letting go. And you can't cheat on any one of them. Grief is something that's bigger than us. It's when our hearts break, and that means our universe breaks. So there has to be rituals, really, that help us to do the proper grieving and to put these heavy experiences into contours, some kind of form and shape, so they can find their way without totally running away with us.
Given the fact that most people know about your Dominican background, can you bring us up to date on where you are with that and with Rome?
Well, Rome gave me a pink slip a year and a half ago and ejected me from the Dominican order after 34 years and from the active Catholic priesthood after 26 years as a priest. So I meditated on that for a while, and I felt that the Vatican had made me a post-denominational priest in a post-denominational time. So to make a long story short, I've made a lateral move to the Episcopal Church in order to continue the work. The work I'm doing, I think, has to go on, and I'm getting a lot of support there from the Bishop of San Francisco. And we're bringing to San Francisco, we did it last weekend, 35 young people from the Anglican Church in Northern England, Sheffield, who are reinventing the Mass using today's medium, today's language of multimedia, rave dancing, rap, techno music. And we put this Mass on in the basement of the cathedral last Sunday, and it was just dynamite. And we're going to create communities here in America to also reinvent, really deconstruct the Mass and reconstruct it in a similar fashion. And I think that's very exciting work, and the Episcopal Church is behind it.
I think that's an important topic here in Santa Fe. As you know, is a big art town. So moving into communications. Greer Garson benefited the College of Santa Fe with a big donation, and they've developed a big center here now for student development. Can you speak a little bit about how art is affecting spirituality and people in general?
Well, all my work has been with artists. When I started the Institute in Culture and Creative Spirituality 18 years ago in Chicago, the first one I hired was not a scripture scholar or theologian. The first one I hired was a dancer. In fact, I saw her yesterday in Chicago, Tria Thompson. I've always worked with artists because art is the only language we have for mysticism. It's the only language we have for experiencing the holy, for expressing our experiences of the holy. And even it limps, but it's better than any other language. So that's one of the great tragedies of religion of the last few centuries. During the modern era, not only religion, but education itself cut itself off from the artist. The artist was on the fringe of culture because in the Newtonian model of the universe, namely a machine, who needs an artist in a machine? Who wants one? Besides, the artist doesn't want to get in the machine. They're too smart to live in a machine. But that's what's healing today with the new paradigm of science. We're moving beyond machine to a sense of the mystery of the cosmos again. The artists are coming back because only the artists have the language to awaken the artist in all of us to respond with awe and wonder and creativity and therefore powers of transformation through art. So I think art is also the missing link between spirituality and social justice. I think without the artist involved in social justice, you just get in a kind of us versus them mode. But with art, you can do much more subversive working on people's chakras and feelings and intuitions and dreams. and body, and all that is so important. And again, this is part of this renewal of ritual that we're sponsoring. It's about artists leading us through the rave. What is rave, after all? It's the artistic edge of the youth culture. So incorporating that language and getting your rave artists leading us in worship is, well, it's dynamite. It opens the chakras up. We had a real experience of it last weekend.
Well, you look in terrific shape. I know you probably look healthier than when you were here 8 or 10 years ago. What are you doing personally to maintain the temple of your spirit, so to speak, on the physical plane?
Well, of course, on the one hand, I'm not carrying the Vatican on my shoulders, which I was doing for 10 years. But physically, I swim, I walk, I hike, I do some yoga and Tai Chi.
And diet?
And I watch my diet. Yeah, I don't eat sugar. Well, I don't eat too much sugar. I don't eat any meat. I gave up all meat. No, all beef. All beef 4 years ago, and that's. I think that's been a good thing.
So how does that play together with spirituality and?
Well, I think the whole issue of our beef industry in this country is a serious thing. I think today, given the realities, what we know about what it costs to raise beef, for example, in terms of land, water, grain, that all of us have to give serious consideration to semi-vegetarianism or vegetarianism. I think our culture has gone hog wild on meat. I think we are meat addicted, and I think it's obvious that we all have to cut back. John Robbins says if we cut back just 10% in North America on eating meat, that 60 million people could eat around the world who are starving. And 10% is pretty easy to do. We can try 50 or 75 and we might really move.
How about some of the areas such as in relationships? What have you learned, or what do you teach in that regard for people who are particularly not involved with religion per se, but are interested in healing their relationships, past or present?
Well, I think relationships in the West suffer a lot from the fact that we do not live in a cosmology. And by that I mean that we become boring people if you don't live in a cosmology. Just like religion becomes boring. Out in nature, every place you turn is interesting. Every angle is interesting. But you know, if two human beings are relating to each other for a while, and they're just living in their man-made worlds or woman-made worlds, and aren't expanding their souls, aren't doing spiritual work and inner work, aren't becoming interesting, therefore, and interested in the greater universe, then they're going to bore each other. And I think that's the first rule in relationships: don't get boring. Do what it takes. Rabbi Heschel says, learning is not for life, learning is life. And if people aren't learning from each other, through each other, and aside from each other, and bringing their learning to each other, then any relationship's going to die. So it's about the soul expanding. If the souls are expanding, how can you be boring each other? How can we bore each other when we live in a universe of 1 trillion galaxies and 14 billion year history that we all have? If we start exploring it and kind of get out of this egocentricity and this these petty worlds that we've been stuffed into, we've had to stuff our souls into during this era, then we'd all be more interesting and relationships would flourish.
Sounds great. Any other final comments you'd like to make before you go in and do the Lord's work?
Well, it's always good to be in Santa Fe. This driving here is such a mystical experience. I feel there are special spirits on this land still wanting to teach us a lot. So I hope that everybody in Santa Fe refuses to take for granted the mystery and the power and the sense of the sacred that's here. And I hope that they resist. Santa Fe is an island.
The Vatican is not loaded with dummies. That the implication being that they knew what they were doing when they censored you, when they gave you your pink slip, that was going to do nothing but bring attention to you and your work. Can you go so far as to say that perhaps there was something method behind the madness, perhaps, to pursue those who the church is not reaching anymore?
Well, I think the Holy Spirit has a wonderful sense of humor and a vision that's bigger than the Vatican's, which would not be difficult. When they silenced me 3 years ago, you know, a lot of more people heard about my work than had been reading it, so I got a kick out of that. So you're right, I think that something good comes out of these things, but frankly I wouldn't give the people in the Vatican that much credit, because I think they did not act out of any kind of vision. I think they acted in fear and fascism, and it's a pity, but these are the times in which we live. And really I think what's happening is that we're demythologizing the papacy at this time in history. The papacy's doing it more. They've done more in 15 years than Protestants were able to do in 500. And the result is that we're creating a level playing field for the next millennium of Christianity, and I don't think the papacy is going to play that big a role, or I don't think it should. I think base communities is the future of the church in the postmodern era.
What about the future of the priesthood and religious orders as you've seen them?
Well, this group I'm working with from Sheffield is a new religious order. It's dynamic, it's young people, they're doing important work, and they're reinventing religious orders. I think all that has to be deconstructed and then reconstructed, and these young people are doing it.
It's half signed. What I would like to do now is have you take in hand two hands. Would you please? And let's take a moment to create a sacred space here. Let's invoke the presence of that which answers to all names and yet remains nameless. It is a presence, it is a power, it is a feeling to claim it as our own, to share it with one another, and to once again know deep in our hearts that peace on earth is inevitable. And so it is. Amen. There is indeed within each and every one of us this divine power. This power calls us daily to be and do in ways which far exceed our own personal expectations. We often enter such challenges with fear and trepidation, opted to lives, meaning, and purpose. We quest for a light which will point the way. Such beacon of light is Matthew Fox. Answering a higher call, Matt Fox has stepped into a ring against formidable adversaries. Inspired by his inner wisdom and gifted with an exemplary ordinariness, he has stood tall and shown a way. Speaking for the ecology, for women's rights, for the needs of the poor and the disenfranchised, as well as each individual's mystical path, Matt has come today to address a much-needed change in our society, that of the renewal of our work as God's divine plan. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Fox.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for your welcome. Is this working? Okay. It's always a special privilege to return to Santa Fe. I always feel at home here. Fellow heretics galore. Just driving here from Albuquerque is such a spiritual experience. It's entering this very, very sacred land where the Spirit's obviously still beckoning to teach us things, to heal us, to wake us up, to bring us together. Are you all hearing me? Is this working? Can they turn it up a little? Is someone operating this? Some hidden angel? Okay. I really do have wonderful memories of being in Santa Fe, and several of them have kind of swept through my mind in the last 20 minutes. One time I was speaking in an auditorium here, and I was showing Hildegard of Bingen's wonderful mandalas from the 12th century. And afterwards, this old Indian came up to me with no teeth at all. And he said to me, while you were talking, all my ancestors came and sat on my shoulders. And they said, listen to this man, he is one of us. And then he said, and who was that lady who did those paintings? She's one of us too. And she is. The very first time I translated Hildegard and taught her in class, the very first class, I had the students read one page of Hildegard's writings. And the first one who spoke said this. He said, I've just come here from 18 years of living on the Lakota Indian reservation. And whoever this woman is, she sounds exactly like the medicine man who was my spiritual director for 10 years on the reservation. And what this is about is the connection that has not been spoken about enough between the Celtic spiritual tradition of Europe and the Native American here. Hildegard, though German, was raised in a Celtic monastery because the Celts settled down the Rhine. And this whole creation tradition that I've been trying to recover, Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, Francis of Assisi, Thomas Aquinas, Julian of Norwich, all of them come out of the Celtic cosmology, which has so much in common with the wisdom of the American native spiritualities, because the Celts never lost cosmology. They never lost a sense of the cosmic Christ. And also, unlike the Spanish and the Portuguese and the English and others, when they went out to do missionary work, they did not go out with an army. They did not go out with an army. They went out with their hearts and their heads. And that's why when they came to the Americas, long before the Portuguese and the Spanish, there was no genocide. They took the wisdom back. And Hildegard of Bingen actually says that the first human being was a red man. And she incorporates these stories that were told in the Celtic monasteries about these red people of wisdom over here. So I'd like to begin this afternoon with a little Celtic poem that I think is a wonderful, wonderful summary of creation spirituality. I just ran across this spring from W.B. Yeats. How many here, by the way, have Celtic blood in them? Irish, Scottish, Welsh? Let's check that out. Wow, see how the Celts got around? Look at that. And those are only the ones who admit it or who know it. That's 90% of you hiding out here. This is really part of our coming to our spiritual roots today, is Celtic Americans demanding more and returning to some of that wisdom. And the Native American path may be, in fact, a path on the way back to your Celtic wisdom. And frankly, when I talk to Native Americans, they would love to have us be just on the way. One important teacher to me, Buck Ghosthorse, who's Lakota, he said to me that his father used to tell him, "Oh, don't worry about these white people, they're just passing through." So this is a brief stanza from a poem by Yeats called A Dialogue of Self and Soul. He says, "I am content to follow to its source every event in action or in thought. Measure the lot, forgive myself the lot. When such as I cast out remorse, so great a sweetness flows into the breast. We must laugh and we must sing, for we are blessed by everything, and everything we look upon is blessed." I'd like to do just a brief exegesis of this poem. It's so rich. I am content to follow to its source. Thomas Aquinas, also deeply influenced by the Celtic tradition, says God is a source without a source. This language of God as source is very feminine, very maternal. So he's going to follow to its source every event in action or in thought. He says he's saying that if you take any action or any, know it, the 14 billion years and the 1 trillion galaxies, I guess that's out here, and run it backwards, it comes back to that one pinprick of a fireball about 14 billion years ago. It goes back to a single source. And when you can reconnect to the source, which is what all meditation is about, your whole life begins over. You're energized. You're new. As Eckhart says, you return to your unborn self. And you are as free, he says, as before you were born. And nothing is lost, no matter what damage or abuse or mistakes or failures or sins we've been involved in. Nothing is lost. Eckhart says you can return to the source and start over. So when he talks about every event in action or thought, that every is cosmological. Cosmos is a Greek word for whole, W-H-O-L-E. Everything leads to a source. And then he says, measure the lot. Forgive myself the lot. The lot is everything again. See, he's thinking cosmologically, which is not the way we've thought in the West for centuries. We've been thinking in pieces, which is a Newtonian view of the universe. Pieces. We've had religious pieces, ethnic pieces, all different kinds of pieces. But here's a fellow talking about the lot, and he's talking about forgive myself the lot. Isn't that interesting? The first act of forgiveness is toward oneself. And how much do you forgive yourself? The lot. All of it, the whole. To learn forgiveness. When such as I cast out remorse, who is this I? This is a male and an Irishman. And the Irish, like the native people of this land, have been deeply, deeply abused spiritually and other ways. And this is why both of these tribes, I believe, are prone to alcoholism. I define alcohol as liquid cosmology. Because when the native people of this land had their ways in a healthy way, and when the Celtic people had theirs in a healthy way, they both had these rich cosmologies. The awareness of the Spirit is everywhere in the land and the animals and the trees and the plants and history and the stars and in us. This great cosmology was taken away from the Celts, beginning in the Council of Whitby in the 7th century, when the Roman Church, the Southern European Christians, started dismantling the Celtic tradition right up to the 19th century, when their language was taken away, just as the language of the native people here was taken away by European Christians. And so the forgiveness has to begin within oneself and been replaced by McDonald's hamburger stands and the whatnot of our civilization. There's a deep memory there that at one time their lives were not trivial, that at one time they lived and they worked and they played and they prayed in the cosmos, in the universe, not in some kind of plastic, man-made cosmology. So greatest sweetness flows into the breast. When the remorse can be let go of, sweetness takes over the breast, which is what the heart chakra. The heart chakra is a central chakra, 3 below, 3 above. And it is this sweetness, this power taking over the heart that moves one then to say, we must laugh and we must sing. This is not a Kantian must. This is not about duty. This is about the natural response of praise. What is praise? Praise is the noise that joy makes. Praise is the noise that joy makes. Praise is the noise that the heart makes. We must laugh and we must sing. We are made for praise. We are made for joy. Everything else is a detail. Thomas Aquinas says, sheer joy is God's, and this demands companionship. This is the origin of the universe. Divinity wanted more community to share the joy in. That's why we're here. Everything else is a detail. We must laugh and we must sing. We are blessed by everything. Everything we look upon is blessed. Blessing is a theological word for goodness. There is goodness everywhere. Everything we look upon has goodness, original blessing. This consciousness and awareness that it is all sacred, it is all holy, it is all blessing us, and we too are blessers in return. There we have, in a few lines from the artist, I think, a powerful summary of all that creation spirituality is about, and all that our paradigm shift is about as we gather in this ominous last years of the 20th century and of what we call the second millennium. And in this context, I want to talk about the reinvention of work, because I think that no spirituality is healthy or real unless it nourishes our work to ennoble it, make it more wonderful, or unless it gives us the courage and the power to critique our work, to criticize it, to improve it, or indeed to leave it if it is work that is not good for the future generations. Two things really drove me to write this book. One is reading the mystics over the years, East and West, and Aboriginal. I've been continually struck by how much they say about work. This totally belies a caricature we've done on mystics in the West, where most of us have been given the image that a mystic is in the corner, standing on his head, staring at his belly button or something. The fact is that the mystics have the most profound things to say about work of anyone I've ever read. And they need to be listened to, especially at this time when we need a great debate about what is work, what is good work, and why all the unemployment. And that's the second issue that drove me to doing this book, the amount of unemployment in the world today. In the European common market, Western Europe today, there's 13% official unemployment, which means it's higher than that. Of course, in our southern countries, the 2/3 of the world that is essentially poor, there is 60 to 80% unemployment, as there is in our inner cities, as there is in pockets of Ireland and many places in the Western world. And yet we're sitting around tolerating this unemployment as if it's a natural thing, as if we can afford it. We can't afford the unemployment in the inner cities. That's why we're building so many prisons. We have so much crime. Because when people do not have work, they cannot give their gift back to the community. And when you cannot give your gift back to the community, when I was doing a book signing a few months ago in the Gaia bookstore in Berkeley, and a man came up, he's an architect. And I said, oh great, I said, what are you building? What are you designing? Prisons, he said. It's the only work I could get in the state of California is designing prisons. It's unbelievable. America has far more persons in prison today per population than any country in the world, including South Africa, even during the darkest times of apartheid. And yet, what are we doing? Our politicians are running on promising to build us more prisons. It would be much cheaper to reinvent work and to reinvent schools, which would be work. Schools that would reach people in the inner city coming out of an abusive situation. Because there are other ways to teach you through creativity, through art, and from there you can move on to other things. So that alone, the reinvention of education, is a whole profession for our moment in time. The amazing thing is that we pay this incredible price for unemployment when there's so much work that needs doing. So much work that needs doing. If there were not a lot of work that needed doing, then maybe unemployment would make some sense. But in terms of education, teaching our young and teaching our middle-aged and teaching the older, my goodness, in America, 40% of the population is functionally illiterate. We could be employing 16-year-olds to be teaching the adults who are illiterate, for example. They did that in Nicaragua, peasants and the older ones who were ashamed of not being able to read. But after that 2-year experiment, the Americans came in with the Contras to fight the war, and of course it all ended. The CIA kind of stifled that for us. But the lesson is there. A third reason I wrote the book is that many people who are employed are not well in their jobs. One study shows that 80% of American workers are unhappy with their work. Another fact is this, that more heart attacks occur in America between 8 and 9 Monday morning than at any other time in the week. Get down to this as a species to get creative and transformative. We are moving out of the modern era. And the modern era essentially began with the printing press in the 15th century, and it all fell apart in the 1960s. Many of us were there to watch it. And the postmodern era has been slowly, ever so slowly, coming to its feet since the 1960s. And you people who were born in the late 60s or later are the first postmodern generation. This makes you very special and very strange. And you are called to be leaders, leaders in an alien land, leaders of an alienated people who have had our soul, who's still the father of Western academia. Now, he taught the soul is the pineal gland. Today, our reductionist scientists are saying, well, the soul is your cerebral cortex. So it's moved 2 inches. We're so grateful for that. Still leaving out all our lower chakras, those chakras that hold up the heart chakra, our sexuality, our solar plexus, our intuitions of moral outrage and power, and of course our bottom chakra, which is where we connect cosmologically with all the music, all the vibrations going on in the universe. All that is left out in our current educational model. This is the modern era. And I do believe the biggest damage, real issue. E.F. Schumacher, the great British scientist, says, you know, we have insurance policies for people whose bodies are damaged at work. But for people whose souls and spirits are damaged at work, you're on your own. You're on your own. I think we have to distinguish between job and work. A job is something we take to pay the bills, to hold us over. A perfectly legitimate thing to do, but we must be aware of when a job is a job and when a job is truly work. Work is something that touches the heart. Work is an avenue for expressing your beauty, for putting it out there. Thomas Aquinas says, all beauty yearns to be conspicuous. It's in our work that we hated it, it was not good for her, but she had no other job in the horizon. So she thought she had to keep it. But one day she just couldn't take it anymore. She knew it was her soul or the job, so she quit with no job in the horizon. 2 months later, she found a job, and it was her work. She told me she's soaring. She's never been happier in her life. She's getting paid for what she truly enjoys doing. But notice what she had to do. First, she had to let go of the job to be ready for when the work came by. If she remained in that abusive situation, she never would have noticed the work when it showed up. She would have been too involved in her own pain and clinging to that unhealthy relationship called a job. And when you analyze what it took on her part to quit, it took risk, courage, and trust. Trust of the universe, that there is work out there. Trust that each of us is here to do something useful and healthy for the community and for the future generations. And so we see that our decisions around work parallel any other spiritual journey we take in our life. It demands the same depth of courage and trust and risk as any spiritual journey demands. It's drier in Santa Fe than most places. You know, what do most people do in life? Spirituality that cannot address work is pseudo-spirituality. This is where so much of our time, effort, dreams, passions, values, spirit is invested. We owe it to ourselves and to our culture to renew our work worlds, to make them worthy of us, to make them worthy of our spirits and of our better selves. And so how are we going to reinvent work today? I think there are especially 4 directions we are being called to. The first is the environmental revolution. The environmental revolution. Remember that the work models, for example, we move from small farming and family farming, in great part, to industrial farming. We paid a great price for that. The land has paid a great price for that. In Iowa today, the richest farmland in America, 20 years ago, the average soil was 18 inches deep. Today, it is 9 inches deep. We've lost 50% of the soil in 20 years. We don't make soil. It's not going to come back. Well, that's typical result of a modern era thinking, where we looked on farming itself as an industry. We're going to take from the land, and the result is that we're destroying our own nest. But the Industrial Revolution affected all kinds of work. Clothes. Instead of growing our cotton and so forth and making clothes at home, we now shop for clothes. And of course, the movement, the migrations from the land to the cities and so forth, all this happened. Everything changed from banking to transportation with the Industrial Revolution. Now, 10,000 years ago, we had an agricultural revolution. And up to then, we were basically hunter-gatherer people. By the way, at our institute last month, an Aboriginal from Australia came for a month to be with us, or 2 or 3 weeks. A wonderful man, Eddie Nebo. And he brought 2 big duffel bags with him, one full of his paintings, which he would put up and exegete for us, these wonderful cosmological paintings of rites of passage for the young people, and just wonderful stories. And the other duffel bag was full of boomerangs. And what I learned that I did not know about boomerangs is this. He pulled out one boomerang and said, now this boomerang is for killing a duck while it's on the water. That's interesting. Now this boomerang is for killing a duck when it flies from the water. This boomerang is for landing a goose when it lands into the water. And this boomerang is for tripping a kangaroo. You can't kill a kangaroo with a boomerang, but you can trip it. They don't have any knees, effectively. So you trip it, and then you spear it. Now, I was just overwhelmed by the sophistication of this technology. I thought a boomerang was a boomerang. But and then you study these and you realize they're built like airplane wings. You see, each one has a different depth and thickness to it to fly at a certain angle and so forth to accomplish its work. Well, these are hunter-gatherers. And this is the way our species lived for millions of years. So you can imagine when agriculture came along only 10,000 years ago, it was a total revolution. Everything changed. One thing that changed was the invention of cities. Because up to then, of course, if you're hunting and gathering, you can't have cities, you got to be out hunting. But now that you're farmers who become more or less specialists at growing food, then others are released who can go and do what you do in cities. So I point out these two revolutions of our past to give you an inkling of the immensity of this phrase, the environmental revolution. The thing about the environmental revolution, as Lester Brown of the World Watch Institute says, and he's a very man of great integrity whose whole institute's task is to go around the world and collect all the scientific data about the health of the planet. His conclusion is we have 17 years left as a species on the path that we're on. 17, and we will not be able to undo the damage we've done to the planet after that. So that means we have 17 years left to bring about the environmental revolution. A new way of living on the planet, a new way of being human, a new way of doing work. Already in America, in the United States, green industries comprise a $500 billion economy, $500 billion, and we've barely begun. So this is well underway, and yet it's not being talked about nearly enough as a citizen's project, as an issue with the politicians, obviously, or and others who are holding the power, including the media. A year or two ago, year and a half ago I think it was, I was speaking in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They had just closed an automobile factory. 4,000 workers thrown out of work within a week. And I was speaking in this church, about 700 people that night. I said to myself before I got on, am I going to tell the whole truth or part of the truth? I said, well, I leave town tomorrow, so I'll tell the whole truth. And I began by expressing my empathy for those families and people affected by this sudden and severe layoff, firing. And of course, I urged the community to come to the support of these people with safety nets and above all with retraining and new jobs. But then I asked this question. I said, you know, there are 600 million automobiles in the world today. That may be close to enough. The automobile is a cause of a lot of our problems in the world today. And maybe we don't need a lot more car factories any more than we need a lot more military bases. And it's time for us to ask a new question. Not the question, how did our parents and grandparents make their living and define work in terms of industrial and factories and car making and military, but this question, what is the work that our future ancestors are asking of us to do today? What is the work that Gaia and Earth is asking of our species today? This is the moment in which we gather even today. This is a special moment. 17 years left. If we can't redefine work, we're not going to get the environmental revolution done. Work is where things happen. This is where transformation takes place. This is where our values get altered and deepened and challenged and expressed. And then I spoke to these families about environmental work. For example, I pointed out, studies show that if in the northern states of the United States today, we would properly insulate our homes and businesses, we would not have to import one drop of oil from the Middle East. And I pointed out, now here, you car factory workers, you're good with your hands. You could be setting up insulation businesses in your homes. You become the boss. You don't become dependent on these multinationals that can drop you at any moment that they feel like it. and you start up businesses, start doing this important work. It's an investment for your children. You can make a living at it. I talked about wind farms. How when Jerry Brown was governor in California 14 years ago, he set up tax rebates for wind farms. The result is there are more wind farms in California than all the other states put together. And this is strange because California is 19th in terms of the amount of wind that it receives. Now, when this industry started 14 years ago, it was not at all competitive economically with coal, gas, or oil. But now they perfected it. They put little computers in each windmill, for example, that always steers the mill in the exact direction to get the maximum amount of wind. The result is it's exactly the same cost today as gas, oil, and coal, yet it's totally clean, totally renewable. It's solar energy. Why not put these farms where there's real wind in the Americas and the Dakotas and Colorado, and how about here? Okay, New Mexico. And we would not have to import a drop of oil from Alaska, endangering that sacred wilderness and everything else that's involved there. And you would have energy, healthy energy for future generations on a totally renewable basis. We can go on and on. I met a young man the other day who was wearing hemp clothes that he had made himself. He raised the hemp and he made the clothes. The very clothes we wear, all of it, the food we grow, the whole issue of organic farming. Our country for 20 years has been supporting industrial farming. We have a socialism for rich industrial farmers. They don't need our money. We should take that money back and give it to small organic farmers. They're the ones who need tax support. And it's healthy because when you do farming personally, the soil stays renewed. It's proven that when we do it as an industry, we destroy the soil and the water and the land. And so it just makes all the sense in the world. This is not about new taxes. It's about using the taxes for agriculture that are being misused at this time in history. So what I'm saying is that the environmental revolution is going to assist us in reinventing work all over the place. Here's one more example that thrills me, architecture. When I was in Amsterdam a year ago, I was given a personal tour by the architect. By the way, he's married to a woman from Santa Fe, I think, an American. He's Dutch. An amazing environmental architect who 7 years ago built the first of his buildings based on complete environmental principles and the philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, of earth, air, fire, water, and ether. And the first building was a building for 2,200 workers in a bank. It's a bank building called the Ing Building. They have 400,000 visitors every year just to see the thing. It is so incredible. He has water running down at the banisters. And they don't spend any money at all in either air conditioning or heating because he has it so figured out that in the winter, the sunlight warms a place with the trees that are indoors, and in the summer, the trees and the water cools it indoors. But what is most amazing is that their absenteeism of people at work is something like 60% less than any other bank in Holland. People want to be there. Why? The key to the architecture is this. There are no right angles in the entire building. Not a one. Not one. So you know a right angle is 90 degrees. That means there must be at least 89 other angles. And there are in that building, and every place you turn, it's like a forest. Every place you turn is interesting. It's interesting. And that's why people like to go to work there. Here's a clever thing. The staircases are so interesting with the water running down them and all that you walk into this big hall. The elevators are right in front of you, but the staircases are right next to you. 90% of the people choose to walk up the staircase because it's so interesting. So they're saving all that energy on elevators. And they're getting their exercise going up staircases instead of driving cars to athletic clubs. So my point is this. There are all kinds of people today getting the issue of the environmental revolution and taking it back to their various work worlds. And there's no work world that can pretend that it is objective and morally neutral about the issue of the collapse, the ecological degradation of our times. This is the moral issue of our time, and there is no neutral ground. We are either somehow getting the message and taking it back to our relationships at home and at work, or we are part of the problem. So the environmental revolution is going to assist us deeply in reinventing work. Another area we need to reinvent work in is that of inner work, We've been avoiding our inner work in our civilization for centuries. We have. The proof of that is that we are mystically illiterate. You know, if you've been doing what I've been trying to do for 20 years and recover the mystical tradition of the West, and journalists call you New Age all the time, you know how illiterate our civilization is. I mean, I wrote a book this thick on Thomas Aquinas, who's been dead 700 years, and they call me New Age. I mean, if I were New Age, the Vatican wouldn't have kicked me out. What I've been doing is deconstructing Christianity, taking it apart and seeing what's worth saving and what isn't. And I'm trying to invent a Christianity that Jesus would be at home with. And that means a Christianity devoid of sexism, and devoid of dualism, and devoid of this fear of the body, and fear of nature, and fear of artists, and fear of women, and fear of everything. So this is ancient. This is older than New Age. And I'm perfectly willing to be on bridges of ecumenism with New Agers. And they've been asking the right questions for 20 years in many respects in this country. But what I'm saying is simply that the inner work is so new to our civilization that journalists, for example, don't have a clue. They don't have a clue about the word mysticism, what it even means, much less that we have deep traditions in the West of the Hildegards and the Eckharts and the Francis of Assisi and Jesus as mystic and the Kabbalah and the Celtic mystical tradition, and Julian of Norwich, and Nicholas of Cusa, and all this. You see, the modern era has ridiculed mysticism. Theodore Roszak, in his brilliant new book on eco-psychology called The Voices of the Earth, I highly recommend it, he says the modern era put down mysticism and held mysticism up as for ridicule as the ultimate transgression against science and reason. So mysticism was not just ignored in the West these few hundred years, and for example, even in our seminary training of priests and ministers and rabbis. Not only was it ignored, it was ridiculed. Because, my friends, there's no room for a mystic in a machine. There's no room for a child in a machine. There's no room for an artist in a machine. And that's why all these beings have been on the fringes, on the circumference, the parameters during the modern era. But again, part of what's happening today is the artist moving into the center of things again, recovering our wisdom traditions, cosmological, mystical, and deep. Now, E.F. Schumacher, himself an economist, not a philosopher as such, though he became one, I guess, as we all do, we go through life. Nevertheless, he wrote this powerful statement. He said, "It is no longer possible to believe," notice believe, it's a matter of belief, "that any political or economic reform or scientific advance or technological progress could solve the life and death problems of industrial society. They lie too deep in the heart and soul of every one of us. It is there that the main work of reform has to be done secretly, unobtrusively." An economist confessing that it's in our souls and our hearts that the main work of reform has to be done. This, my friends, is the big new industry of our time. Inner work. Inner work. In another place, Schumacher says, in fact, it's in the last paragraph of his classic work, Small is Beautiful, in the epilogue, very last paragraph, he says, "Everywhere people are asking, what can I actually do? The answer is as simple as it is disconcerting. We can each of us work to put our own inner houses in order." See, that same call to inner work, our inner houses, putting them in order. Now, we all have inner houses as individuals, as members of a family tree and so forth. So dealing with those issues, family, inner house, putting in order, is a reality. It's work. And we need help, base communities and so forth to help. But we also belong to many other houses. Women have their inner house to put in order as women. And they've been doing a pretty damn good job of it the last 20 years, I think, in our culture. Men have inner houses to put in order as men. And that's what the men's movement is about. To deal with our stories as men. How have we suffered, even though often rewarded? How have our souls suffered during the Industrial Revolution? You know, Robert Bly says that when he conducts men's workshops, the number one issue that always comes up is not relationships to wives, mothers, spouses, lovers. The number one issue that comes up is work. That most men feel truly abused at work. He said in one of his groups, a man stood up, he said, I've been a corporate executive for 20 years. For the last 7 years, I've been involved in corporate crime. And he said the group went silent for 10 minutes. In terms of our ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, we have inner work to do. The native people of this land have their inner work to do based on their history. African Americans have theirs based on theirs. Celtic Americans theirs. Jewish people theirs. Italians theirs. We belong to so many communities. We have so many inner houses to deal with. Gay and lesbian people have inner houses to deal with as gay and lesbian in a homophobic culture. And clearly heterosexuals have their inner work to do, because if they were doing it well, there wouldn't be homophobia. And of course, Christians have so much recovering to do. Recovering Christians. They are a majority every place. Roman Catholics, oh, so much inner house work to do. I know a Franciscan priest from Manhattan who came to our program a few years ago, and he was bored one day in the rectory there in Manhattan, so he put a 2-inch ad in classified ads in the New York Times saying, are there any wounded Catholics out there who'd like to come and talk about it? He thought he might get 35 or 40 people. 400 people showed up. Twice as much as showed up for Mass on Sunday. It's a whole industry out there getting the inner house of wounded Christians in order, believe me. And Jews have their wounded house to deal with. And then there are our professions. The inner house of lawyers. Yes, there is one. We must believe. The inner house of business people, the inner house of artists. Oh, artists have been so abused these last few hundred years and so ignored in our churches. Artists have been so cut off from their spiritual source, they've had to do it on their own. And that's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. So artists have to be welcomed back to a community that's recovering the sense of the sacred. And of course, how do we recover the sense of the sacred? This is part of the environmental revolution. Thomas Berry says, ecology is functional cosmology. Ecology is functional cosmology. Because we're getting a new creation story from science today that moves us beyond this machine nonsense and itself alerts scientists to the mystery of the universe again and to the holiness of origins and the sacredness of origins. Because of this, we are all being washed over with a new sense of the sacred. And this is the cosmology that we take back to heal our inner houses with. This is what we do the healing with. Now, when you talk about inner work, I think there are two deep dimensions to inner work. The first is joy. And what you find in reading mystics about work that stuns me constantly is this is carried through in all the mystics who write about work. Another example is Thomas Aquinas, 13th century Westerner, who says, everything gives pleasure to the extent that it is loved. It is natural for people to love their own work. Why? because we love to be and to live. And these are made manifest in our action. Now this is typical of the mystics, to return our action to being. Action is an expression of our being, expression of our living, and therefore we love it. Because we love to be, and we love to live. And our action is just part of it. It's the overflow. In addition, he says, we love our work because we all naturally love that in which we see our own good. That work is our blessing. That's our goodness is out there now. You put it out in the world. It's like a mirror or a self-portrait on the wall. That's what our work is. And it smiles at you. It smiles back and says, thank you. We're in this together. Studs Terkel is another mystic. I think the high point for me this spring on my book tour was that he interviewed me on his program on his 84th birthday yet. And I'd always admired Studs, coming from the Midwest myself and living in Chicago many years. I'd never had the honor of meeting him. And he's just so beautiful. At 84, he's still fighting the fight. And he's still so connected to his roots, the blue-collar working class of Chicago. And of course, he wrote that wonderful book on working 12 years ago, which is where he picked up on my book, where I was picking up on his. But in one passage in his book, he wrote, "This book about working is a search for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor. In short, for a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying." This wonderful belief and affirmation that our work must contain meaning, recognition, astonishment, and life. All that is what the mystics call the Via Positiva. All that is inner work. You have every right to ask questions about joy and astonishment in your lives and in our work. But the second dimension of inner work is the Via Negativa, going into the darkness, going into the pain, the suffering, and the grief. And there's so much grief work that needs doing today on our planet because so much is dying. Grief work around the planet's demise, grief work around the despair of the young people, grief work about our own feelings toward institutions that are failing us and toward relationships that are not serving well. Again, Studs Terkel names, I think, this going into the Via Negativa. He says, work by its very nature is about violence, to the spirit as well as to the body. It is about ulcers as well as accidents, about shouting matches as well as fistfights, about nervous breakdowns as well as kicking the dog around. It is above all about daily humiliations. To survive the day is triumph enough for the walking wounded among the great many of us. So this naming of the pain at work, very important, because if we don't name it, we're going to be set up for the addictions that buffer us from it, whether that addiction be entertainment, or shopping, or drugs, or alcohol, or relationships, or whatever it is we're capable of employing to further the denial, the distancing of ourselves from our deepest pain. I believe that the Industrial Revolution wreaked such havoc on our souls that we had to create two new industries to deal with that havoc. One was psychiatry and therapy, and the second was entertainment. 2 days ago, we heard the news that a basketball player signed a contract for $70 million. That's one basketball player. Now, is that absurd or is that absurd? Where is the money coming from? It's coming from people who go home from work so wounded that they can't entertain themselves. They can't read, they can't write poetry, they can't dance, play a musical instrument, have conversation with their loved ones, garden. Half of them can't even make love. What do you have to do? Turn on a tube and pay someone $70 million a year to live for us. You see, my friends, if we're going to reinvent work, we're also going to have to reinvent free time. It's all the same thing. It's about getting our souls back. It's about getting over this sin of the spirit that our ancestors called acedia, A-C-E-D-I-A, which is what we call today depression, sadness, cynicism, despair, and what Thomas Aquinas called in the 13th century the lack of energy to begin new things. And what is the medicine to cynicism, to acedia? According to Aquinas, zeal, and zeal is obviously the opposite of acedia, it's energy. Zeal comes, he says, from an intense experience of the beauty of things. An intense experience of the beauty of things. You can see now the spiritual basis for an environmental revolution. It's a rediscovery of the beauty of the forests. Are you aware that we're destroying rainforests at the rate of 1 acre a second, even as we sit here? Thomas Berry points out that rainforest may be the most beautiful accomplishment of this planet. A rainforest may actually be the most beautiful accomplishment of the entire universe. We're destroying 1 acre a second. To rediscover the beauty of the rainforest would fill us with moral outrage about what we're doing to the rainforest. And we'd find ways of changing and not allowing that to happen. The ozone layer took 1 billion years to develop and fine-tune until it was just right for species like our own. 1 billion years. And in the last 100 years, our civilization has been pumping holes in it willy-nilly because we don't love it. We don't understand its beauty. Today, in Japan, they're building an underground city to protect themselves from the radiation because of the ozone holes. When I was in Australia and New Zealand this past year, you can't send a kid outdoors without a hat on at any time of the day. You don't dare send your kid out. I actually talked to Australians, and my impression is that within a generation, Australians may be like owls. They'll only come out at night. And imagine our entire species from the beginning has honored the sun, welcomed the sun as an ally, as it is indeed. But because of what we've done in the Industrial Revolution the last 100 years, the sun is now becoming a potential enemy. Not in itself, but because we are removing the protective layer, because we're not in love. We're too busy watching soap operas of all kinds, including our own living ones, on news broadcasts, too busy watching, living vicariously, our anthropocentric self-indulgence to fall in love with the cosmos, which is where we're going to find our new relationships healed and find deep places to play in. So what I'm saying is the industry of inner work is calling us today. And of course, the basis of it is going to be ritual. I was totally surprised at the last chapter of this book because it was not in my outline. I was not expecting it at all. And when I thought I'd finished the book, this chapter insisted on being written, and it is about ritual. What I actually ended up saying is that the most important fundamental work of our generation is ritual. Because it is in ritual that we connect microcosm to macrocosm, that the new creation story gets told. It doesn't get told well in academia. It doesn't get told well in books. It's got to be told through dance and mystery and a new experience of the sacred. And today, just as the modern era began with the printing press, today we have multimedia, electronic ritual, which is the basis of the postmodern revolution. And we need to be using this for ritual because this is our new language. Especially the young people know this. It is their language. They will lead us in this recovery of ritual. Rilke, the poet, wrote early in this century, somewhere there's an ancient enmity between the great work and our daily lives. The great work, that's a statement on how there's only one work in the universe. It is the work of creation unfolding. That is the great work. Now, every other species is connected to it, and that is why there's no unemployment out there. There are no galaxies unemployed, no planets, no stars, no trees, no whales, no grass. All the beings have work, except us. We've invented unemployment, and we can disinvent it. And one reason there's so much is that we're still thinking of work in terms of the Industrial Revolution, instead of in terms of the real work than he's doing today, including at the heart of it is ritual. Because it's in ritual the community itself does its grieving. It's paying attention to its pain, its group pain. And it does its celebrating. It's living for the sake of living. It's praising. And when those two things can happen, the inner work of in reinventing your relationships. And I'm not just talking theory. Because two things happened to me personally in the writing of this book. Halfway through it, on Monday morning, I was at my computer, doorbell rang, and it was Federal Express with a pink slip from the Vatican. And I was quite surprised, even though I knew I was in a battle. I didn't know that we'd lose. So I meditated on what that meant, being thrown out of my job after 34 years as a Dominican and 26 as a Roman Catholic priest. And the word that came to me in meditation was post-denominational. I realized the Vatican had made me a post-denominational priest in a post-denominational time, which was quite a favor. Why do I mean by post-denominational? I mean this. I don't know any 20-year-old any place who can tell me the difference between an Anglican, a Roman Catholic, a Presbyterian, a Methodist, or a Lutheran, or who cares. This is part of the postmodern era, you see. In the modern age, we were all into parts. Newton buttressed that with his physics, that it's a parts world and a parts mentality. You were Lutheran part, Anglican part, Roman Catholic part, Buddhist part, atheist part, all those parts. Today, all that is washing away. The issues are so grave and serious before the one work, which is creation. As I've written elsewhere, there's no such thing as a Roman Catholic river and an Anglican rainforest and a Lutheran sun and a Baptist moon and a Buddhist ocean and an atheist cornfield. So let's get on with it. And frankly, when you hold denominationalism up there and look at what it's done the last 400 years, the amount of wars that it spawned, the amount of people that it's killed on all sides in the name of Christ of all people, we have to recognize that denominationalism is right up there with racism, sexism, and other colonialism and the rest. Now that does not mean that our various traditions do not bring something special to the rediscovery of the sacred and of prayer. But it's one thing to bring something special, and it's another to come proselytizing and so forth. So anyway, I was rendered post-denominational by this act of the Vatican. So I wondered, what are my options? Well, one option was do what Father Aristide did in Haiti, and that is to kind of hide under a rock as priest and just get on with your work. And that was very tempting to me, since being a priest isn't that important to me. The other option was Father Buff in Brazil, who stood up and said, "Make me a layman again. I can't do theology and be a priest in today's Roman Catholic Church." That was very tempting to me. But then 2 weeks after I handed this book in to the publisher, I was in Seattle for a 5-day summer program we did, and 4 Englanders flew into the program from Northern England, from Sheffield, England. Young people in their 20s, from the rave community there. And they told me that they were reinventing the Anglican Mass, which is your Western liturgy, using rave dance, rap, techno music, multimedia, and creation spirituality, which is why they came to Seattle for that workshop. And this blew my mind, because I just finished this book saying, hey, what we need is new ritual, and reinvent it. And they gave me documents about what they're doing. One of their sentences was, this is not worship for young people, but by young people. In other words, they saw that they, being the first generation of postmodernists, were taking responsibility for reinventing the boring worship forms of worship that we have in the West. Boring because they're modern and not postmodern or pre-modern even. So I flew out there in November to check it out, to Sheffield, England. I told a friend when I got on a plane, if this is half as good as I think it's going to be, I want to spend the rest of my life starting it in America. Well, it was twice as good as I thought it was going to be. And the key to it is the community. There are 300 young people dedicated to this, totally dedicated. And they're blue-collar kids. Sheffield has 25% unemployment. It's where the Industrial Revolution began and where it is dead. It's the Youngstown, Ohio of England. And these people are not privileged people at all. You can imagine how much family abuse there is in an economic situation like that. And fundamentalism, of course. Most of them come out of religious abuse. I've noticed that wherever there's economic depression, there's religious depression, and that's fundamentalism. So they're dealing with their stuff. They're dealing with drug addictions, alcohol addictions, relationship addictions, sexual addictions. But the point is, they're dealing with it because they have such great work, non-trivial work. They're putting on this worship every Sunday for the greater community. What's happening? 600 people come every Sunday, average age 27. Now that is a miracle. That is a sociological phenomenon. Because in Europe today, in England, 3% of Anglicans are practicing. 3%. And none of them are in their 20s. They have 600 people Sunday night because they're making worship interesting again. Now, Melodoma Somé, some of you may have read his books, a wonderful African spiritual teacher living in Oakland, wonderful tribal man. I told him about this. We always talk in the redwood forest there near my school. And I remember when I told him about his soul went right up to the top of a redwood. I had to go like this and pull him down and say, what was that? He said, I'm so blown away. He said, for my 4 years living in America, one constant refrain keeps coming in my meditation. And that is that these North Americans need a great big breakthrough. And he said, you know, I'm working in the men's movement. He works out with Robert Bly and all that. But he said it's important, but it's not big enough. He said, what you're talking about is it, for 3 reasons. First, it's young people. And he said, when a culture loses spirituality, only the young can bring it back. That's such an important statement. It doesn't mean we older ones don't have a job. We definitely do, to assist the young. But what's being said is this, that bringing spirituality alive is such a great task that it takes a whole new generation with the vigor and the commitment and the generosity and the lack of responsibilities, if you will, something you still have something of when you're young, to reinvent something like forms of spirituality. When a culture loses spirituality, only the young can bring it back. I think only the young can bring it back for the same reason that when the old want a war, they send the young to do the job for them. It is that kind of thing, and I think we have an option. You know, in the goddess times, in that period of 25,000 years of European history, when they were worshiping the goddess, there's no evidence whatsoever of war, of warfare. It's as, and Gimbutas, the great feminist archaeologist, said the essence of goddess times was celebration of life. What that teaches me is this. To celebrate life is a full-time job, it's a full-time cosmology, it's a full-time attitude that the young have to carry and give to the others. And so it's as if we have an option. We can send our young to war, and by war I don't mean just humans against humans, but humans against the earth, the forest, the water, the soil, the indigenous people, people different from ourselves, all the wars that we have encouraged in our civilization. We can go on that way, and of course war against people of different religions, people who aren't saved like you're saved. We have an option. We can do that. The young can choose that, and some are choosing it. Or with this other option, to go the way of praise, to go the way of celebration of life. And if we were to gather up that kind of energy, we would indeed not only be reinventing work, but we would be reinventing the human. Now, when these people came to me, and I came to them, and had this incredible experience at their place of worship, I asked them, how can I help? Well, your theology, keep doing theology, and also why don't you become an Anglican priest to help us run interference and all that? I thought that was interesting, and that was an option I hadn't thought of. So I made my lateral move, speaking to the bishop's wing of San Francisco about this, the Episcopal bishop there, and he said, well, you know, it's true. He said, the church is reaching the 50 and 60-year-olds. We're not doing a darn thing for the 20-year-olds. We should get out of the way and let them do whatever they have to do. And so he offered the basement of the cathedral for us to put on one of these masses. So last weekend, we flew in 35 members of this community of 300, or the week before. It took them a whole week to convert this basketball court into this sacred space in which they do ritual. And it is the Mass, but it's unbelievably exciting. Cosmological, for example, they have two altars, one big round white one that is the sun, and attached to it is the eclipse moon altar, the moon. So wonderful archetype of the male-female right in the center of the experience. And at their place in Sheffield, which is a big round room, they have 42 television sets, 12 video screens, and projections all around the round walls of galaxies dancing, DNA dancing, atoms dancing, planets dancing. The white altars are also screens, so they're projecting colors and geometric forms onto the altar during the service. The moment you walk in, you know you're in a sacred place, an interesting place, and a microcosm of our holy place, the temple of God we call the universe. And you sit on mats on the floor, and then you get up often and do rave dancing on the spot. And there are DJs, and there's live music, and on the screens are the words, and then also on the screens are pictured all kinds of stories. And then they create their videos each week. And of course the service is also live on these videos and TV screens. So the preacher, I happen to be the preacher a couple of those times, you're on those screens. And they put in their videos, they'll read the scriptures, put in a video that is a commentary on the scripture. So they're creating videos each week, they're creating music each week, they're creating new dance each week, choreographing it each week. This is why you need a community of 300 to put on good ritual. And I'm reminded of something an Indian taught me 2 years ago. I was doing a conference at Aspen, Colorado with John Denver's group there. And it was Sunday morning that I was lecturing, and I began with a ritual where we did some circle dancing in the chairs and so forth. And I did my talk and all that. Well, afterwards I ran into an Indian who was at the conference, Native American. He said, I just loved your ritual. He said, it was just so great. Oh, I just love that ritual. Well, I said, well, thank you. I'm glad you did. Oh, gee, it was so great. He said, it was just so wonderful. It just really turned me on. He said, come on, you're putting me on. Oh, it was so wonderful. He said, just such a great ritual. I said, stop. Cut the bull. I said, what are you really telling me? That was a very modest little thing we did on clumsy steps and everything. Well, he said, what I mean is this, that you didn't steal a ritual from us. You white people can make up your own rituals. And this is the lesson in using multimedia and technology. And this is what Melodoma said. I said there are 3 reasons why I got all turned on. Because the young are leading, because it's ritual. He said, and ritual is the basis of all community. Nothing's going to happen in America until we recover ritual. And number 3, he said, is technology. And he said, technology is your Western gift to the world. Why wouldn't it be incorporated into making worship powerful and interesting? And you know, I was thinking about that. We've lassoed technology in this century for war, for the military, for industry, for entertainment and news, which are about the same thing, and for business, with computers and all of that. Isn't it time to start lassoing technology to pass on a sense of the sacred to one another? And that's what happens. So what I want to do is show you a very brief clip. It's just a minute and a half of, do you get a feel of this worship? Now, this particular clip is not from what we did Sunday. It is from Sheffield itself, and it's just a very brief clip, but I think it gives a hint of what the spirit is. And so if we can have the lights off. Oh, great. Great. Don't turn on until we get the lights off, because, or you may want to check what you turn. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Good. I help her.
Yeah. Can you ask Matt to turn the lights off?
Can we turn the lights off, please? When we did this last Sunday night, it was a packed house. We had to hand out tickets to keep everyone away. And we deliberately handed most of them to street people, grade people, young people. But 80% of the people there were young. Okay. I'll talk about that later. Don't blink or you'll miss it. It's, of course, this isn't a very big screen for some of you far away either. Sorry about that. Can you turn it louder? Is it? I apologize that it wasn't larger screen and all that, but it works. It works. Sunday night we did this a week ago today. The place was filled with 250 people, about 80% young people. The bishop was dancing. Greer Garcia was there. And so many conversions happened. There were Buddhists there and Jews there and atheists there. And so many people got it. One woman came up to me and she said, I went to church this morning, I sat in my pew and prayed as hard as I could, and about this much of my soul was affected. I came here tonight and my whole being was affected. An Anglican woman priest who was there came up to me 2 days later. She said, you know, when I dance real hard, and when I pray real hard. I've never put the two together before, and the experience just blew my mind. She said, I want to sell my house tomorrow and move to Sheffield. I think the rest of my life has something to do with these young people. A young artist, 27, who lives in the inner city in San Francisco, I called him 2 days later. He said, you know, I was really turned on at the service, but today, 2 days later, I'm more turned on. The vibrations are still happening in me. I was calling my publisher, my editor, and I ended up talking to his secretary. She was there. She said, I've never been in church in my life. I've never been to a rave in my life. But she said, something happened to me. My whole head is spinning like I've never felt before in my whole life. So what we're going to do is to create a community in America, beginning in the Bay Area there. 15 of these Englanders are going to stay and start a community. And in 6 months, we hope to have a ritual center where we'll be doing this kind of service every week. And we won't have to limit the numbers because it'll be in a warehouse, some bigger place. And really what this community is a new religious order. It's a spiritual order of healthy people living healthy lifestyles and challenging the rave community to let go of drugs and to re-experience the mysticism that can happen through healthy worship. But I really do believe that the postmodern generation, this new young generation, that they are specialists at celebration. And this is why they're being called to lead us in reinventing a ritual. And the implications are so immense. When they called me, before I even went to November, we talked to Sheffield in November a year ago, we talked on the phone and they said, our number one problem is this. We're turning on 600 people every Sunday night with all this energy. We don't know what to do with them the rest of the week in the streets of Sheffield. I said, number one, wallow in the problem. Wallow in it. Enjoy it. I don't know any church in the world that has this problem today. Number two, it's obvious what happens. You unrelease this energy so that people can go to work, so we can do something about homelessness, do something about the youth despair, do something about reinventing our various professions. That's what energy means, is to be put to the work of transformation. So I want to share that with you because I feel that ritual work is something many of us are called to participate in, and many are called to be leaders of, especially young people today. And one thing I've learned from watching this community is that they are teaching me anew that the alternative to capitalism does not have to be communism. The alternative to capitalism can be community. They can do things so much more cheaply that way, with dedication and a shared vision, and the healing that goes on there. Just one example, I was with them talking about a video that we wanted to do, and I had what I thought was a really good bid at $10,000, and they laughed and said, we can do a video at $1,000. We'll do you 10 for 10,000. Because they got the equipment, they have the labor. You know, there are ways to lower our cost of living. Some of them will work full-time jobs outside so that those on the rituals can work full-time inside, and then they'll reverse roles. And they're dealing with the issues of gender justice, of authority, all those issues that are so important to deal with in our time. Relationship, the number one issue is dealing with relationship. Well, I think it's time that you people take a break. It's been that you've been very patient. Let me close with one more statement from a mystic about work, and I think it summarizes what I've been trying to say. A statement by Meister Eckhart. He said, your outward work can never be small if your inward work is great. And your outward work can never be great or even good if your inward work is small or of little worth. Your inward work always includes in itself all size, all breadth, and all length. You see, this man did not believe that soul is in the pineal gland. In fact, none of the medieval creation mystics believed the soul was in the body at all. They believed the body was in the soul. If your body's in your soul, then inner work does not mean a lot of introspection necessarily. It means going into the depths of what motivates you and what gives you energy and passion, into your values, into your commitments, into your moral outrage, into your experiences of beauty and your experiences of the divine. And you ride that inner life into all your work, into all your thoughts, into all your relationships, into the universe. And this is where microcosm, us, and macrocosm, God's home, the universe, comes together. And when that comes together, you have a renaissance. You have a rebirth of energy. Us out yet.
You want to take a 10-minute break and then come back for questions and answers? Is that what you want to do?
That's fine. Is that good for you? 2 years ago, I was on a program with Gore Vidal. I called him Al Gore, which it was in Washington, D.C., and it was a common boundary conference, about 2,000 people, and I got up and I thanked Senator Al Gore, and the place just roared for 10 minutes, and afterwards bets were taken on whether that was an intentional faux pas to get a laugh or not. It was just a faux pas. Anyway, Al Gore showed these slides that were so interesting from satellite of Europe 5 years ago. That would have been 7 years ago in Europe at that time, 2 years ago. And what you see is a desertification of Europe. You see the desert of North Africa moving. Europe moves from being green to being brown in its southern parts. This has everything to do with the horrors happening in southern Italy today in terms of the mafia power and so forth, because you see the land is going. When people don't have land, they can't live. They got to migrate someplace. So that's the bigger context of these immigration issues. And in Europe, it's even more xenophobic than it is in California in terms of the rise of the right wings, whose whole message is keep the immigrants out. Only because of the warming of the planet, which we are also mostly responsible for. So it's not enough to just say, and if you come up here illegally, we're not, we're going to let your children go unhealthy and so forth. That's ridiculous. I mean, we could have all kinds of plagues started and stuff. So I think we have to take a look at the deeper issues, and it's not just an American issue. It's South-North issues. And I think we've been in denial about these issues for so long that this is what hopefully is going to bring them into the public debate. That we have to find a different relationship between North and South, between the 1/3 of the world that is wealthy and the 2/3 that is very poor. However, remember, in the 2/3 of the world, it's not us them. But I think we have to deal with this on a much wiser level than passing xenophobic and what are essentially racist laws. So I am 1,000% against Proposition 187, but it does raise an issue that we need much more discussion and debate and creativity about. The issue of immigration and the warming of the planet. How do I see a political activism evolving in this postmodern world that includes spirituality and is different from previous political activism? I think that the environmental crisis has the capacity to... I think our country is pretty much at a stalemate about racism. I think we've hit a dead wall. And I think the reason is a heart issue. The reason is we have not dealt with the grief involved in racism. There's a young black man who went through our program a few years ago from the ghetto of Cleveland. He saw it all. His best friend murdered by the Black Panthers in front of him when he was 12, and drugs and alcohol and prison and all that. Very bright guy. He discovered science and the news trace story, then us, etc. Very talented fellow. He said to me one day, he said, I know you white people are against racism, but I, as a black guy, can't help you with that. You have to deal with grieved slavery. where we mourned and grieved the way the indigenous people were treated on this land. I remember we have on our faculty many different kinds of people, including indigenous teachers and African dancers. And one of our African dance teacher, she taught a dance to our class a few years ago, the slavery dance. Slavery dance. And a young white man came up to me after the class. He said, you know, he's a very bright guy from Wisconsin. He said, I've always been against slavery. But he said, until we did this dance, and I felt it in my body, I never knew what slavery was. I didn't know what I was against. The patient in our political system is that the body politic is full of toxins. And you're not going to get it out by hiring Madison Avenue advertisers to praise your candidate or to put down others. There has to be body work, body politic work. There has to be ritual that grieves these issues that are clogging our collective moral and political imaginations. Now, I had the privilege this June of dialoguing with the gubernatorial candidate of California during his campaign, Tom Hayden. In the middle of his campaign, we had a public dialogue on spirituality and politics. I presume he's the only politician in the country that would have opposed. And I spoke about how one does not want to speak bad of the dead. And I just said this: what we can say about Richard Nixon is that he was clearly a modern politician. He set his politics after Machiavelli, who was a 15th century first modern politician, who said that all politics is in the head, it's winning and losing. You play whatever game is necessary to win and not lose. Richard Nixon played that scenario out very effectively. But it seemed to me that we were right on the cusp there of burying a modern politician and listening to a postmodern. Tom Hayden got up there, and his first thing he did was to read a prayer for the earth. He has a cosmology. He has a spirituality and the inner life into politics. And that means, of course, taking it away from the forces, the money forces that are controlling it, and because of the cost of advertising on television. I mean, this horrible Senate race going on in California, where this man, Huffington, is now spent $30 million of his own dollars on his campaign. And he's neck and neck with what should I say, with Dianne Feinstein, who I think has as good a record for 2 years in the Senate as anyone has ever been able to have. It's just scary, the evidence that we can buy some of our highest offices in the land. That just has to stop. So I think that rituals like I'm talking about can so cleanse the body politic and can unite us around the real issues, the moral political issues of ecology and violence and other issues of our time. And it can so unleash the chakras and cleanse them in individuals that the energy comes forward so that we can reinvent politics and do it with much more passion and compassion and truly be participants in it. So that's what I would hope for. And I think this must be expected in a postmodern time. Now, another dimension that Tom Berry talks about is, he says, the fact is the Declaration of Independence was written for the two-legged ones. No other species is included. That's typically modern, So we need another amendment to the Constitution, and that is to include the other species so they get a vote. As Tom Hayden points out, in the state of California, we have trees over 700 years old that have no rights whatsoever. No rights whatsoever. And this is one thing they've done at the practical level, press conferences. You know, there's no group that is more subject to acedia and cynicism than journalists, especially those covering the political beat. So these postmodern young political thinkers have come up with some ideas to get even journalists alive at press conferences. So to pass a bill to protect the last bears in the state of California, they invited to the press conference a bear. This woke up the journalists. It was an especially cuddly bear. And so first they brought the bear in, and they showed the bear, and the journalists were at the edge of their seat, and all this, and then they invited him up to tickle the bear, and all this and all that. Then the journalists sat down, and then the politicians talked about passing the law of the bear. They got very good press. And they've done the same thing with cougars and so forth. So, you know, it's about imagination. All redemption is about imagination. And that is why when our imaginations, our powers of creativity are thwarted and constipated, we are in trouble, and we lash out at one another. And so a deep part of the new cosmology is creativity. If there's one thing that distinguishes Einstein from Newton, it's that Newton felt the universe for the most part complete, and Einstein found that the universe from the get-go has been creating and creating and creating and creating. This gives all of us to re-enter. For one thing, it's taught us the lie of objectivity. That we're not morally neutral, and we're not even neutral when it comes to epistemology and knowledge. We are participants. We are participatory. We are in relationship. This is the ancient mystical tradition. All things are related. Eckhart said in the 14th century, the essence of everything that exists is relation. No wonder he got condemned, because that's contrary to 2,000 years of Western metaphysics and science. But I think that post-quantum physics has opened our minds on this, and realizes it's in an examination of relationships, not of objects, of relationships. I think that the introduction of mystery to both microcosm and macrocosm is terribly important in the scientific world today. And I always say that this is why so many scientists have been struck by awe all over again. And to be struck by awe is to experience the sacred. Therefore, it's to become mystical. And so instead of fighting mysticism, many of our scientists today are leading the way. And that holds tremendous potential for recovering ritual and reinventing education and reinventing relationships. I think Professor Papp's finding that every atom in the universe contains photons or light waves is an incredible statement of together and wakes us all up. So I think that quantum physics has moved us beyond subject-object relationships, back to interconnectivity, back to communion as being the basis of being itself. That's the basic mystical insight. It was Jesus' insight, the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is among you. Where? He said, don't look here and don't look there. It's not an object. It is among you. Get some amongness consciousness and you'll get the kingdom. Between the church and starting these groups for the planetary mass and the rave culture and so forth. Yes, there are increased spirituality groups, not just around the country, but around the world. And many of them are listed at what we call connectors in the end of the magazine, Increased Spirituality magazine. Phone number to call and so forth. And these are groups, base communities that are creating rituals, studying the new creation story from science, studying the mystics, doing ecological work and other works of compassion, and base communities, so they're doing it themselves. And so I would recommend looking at the back of Creation Spirituality magazine. Each issue has then divided by places. There may even be a group here in Santa Fe, if there is.
Can you ask, is there one?
Is there one? Someone stand? Well, maybe there should be then. There is.
Celebration.
It's called Celebration? No? Sorry. Should have looked at the magazine before I came. The second question, I'm not sure I understand your question. Kind of how to get this going in a church? Is that your question? Or how did it start historically in the church?
Is there one of the members that, like, how
Yeah.
did these,
You want to know the history of a little?
the kids kind of got together and
Okay,
my
this
son
is
interested. That's why I'm
great.
asking. Yeah.
It started this way. Chris Brain, who's kind of the originator of it, about 12 years ago was a musician, folk musician pretty much, no, a rock musician pretty much. He was on stage with U2. It's not the energy that we need. So he quit music that night, and he wandered. And in 3 months, he ended up wandering into a rave club in northern England. And he said, in 10 minutes, he said, on entering the room, he said, this is the future of music. It's mystical. The feminine is present. It's not about heroes on stage. Everybody participates. And it's cosmological, therefore. Not about heroes. Not about heroes. And then he started hanging out at rave places and gathering friends. And then he realized how religious this was. What rave does, you know, they stay up all night to have a trance. The nearest thing to it is a vision quest. They dance all night to have a trance. Or it's like a powwow where you dance. Well, we got to connect this to the church. So he checked the church out, and he said, well, I guess I'm going to have to become a priest. So he joined the seminary, Anglican seminary. He was in there a few years and almost killed him. The bishop plucked him out a year early, ordained him and said, do what you have to do. And by then he had this community. So they started this community in a church, in the biggest church in Sheffield, and it got so successful in 2 years that they got kicked out. The adults in the church said, there are too many young people around here. Yes. So they kicked them out. So there they were, and then they found a place downtown in the bottom of a sports stadium, big round room. And that's where they've been ever since. The bishop has supported them from the start. And he told me, I went and congratulated him, and he said, well, I had to support them because I had a mystical experience when I went to their liturgy. As many people do. And he said, you know, it's obviously it's the most interesting thing happening in my whole diocese. Why wouldn't I support him? The only interesting thing you might have had. You know, in San Francisco, the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, this year closed down 12 churches. Many of them big, beautiful architectural monuments. Closed down because no one's there. 35 people coming to church on Sunday. And an article in the paper quoted a guy saying, hey, this is a mismanaged corporation. They're selling their assets instead of asking, why doesn't anyone want what we have to offer today? And I mean, I'll tell them why they don't want it, because the forms are wrong. The forms are wrong. It's not speaking to people to sit in the bench and be read at. It's typical modern, words, words, words. It's how this do with the printing press. So this is where then the Sheffield people moved to this place, developed it more, and put on their first Mass, and they read it, but they were looking for a theology that would support their intuitions of what was needed. And then they found my work, and the Cosmic Christ book especially, and Original Blessing. And they flew over and made this connection. And so now we're really making an explicit marriage between creative spirituality and this movement. They call themselves a 9 o'clock service, NOS, though they meet at 8 o'clock. To get it going here in America. So that's how it started, but you know, we don't have to repeat it. It took them 15 years. They've been a community for 15 years. They only put the first Mass on about 2 years ago. But now this is morphic resonance. We don't have to go through all that. It's much faster this time around. And they got such a reception in San Francisco, including the journalists, who, by the way, we carefully trained and educated about this before it happened, that they were just overwhelmed. They got much more information here than they've ever gotten in Sheffield. And I warned them about that. I said, America is a tinderbox for ritual today. This is just the right timing. This is where it's going to catch fire. And what we want to do is get the community going, get the ritual center up. Will also be a school, a free school, I hope. And then I hope we'll have enough community members trained to go on the road, like rock singers do, or like the Tent Revival did, and hit different cities to show people the power of this, and then to gather with those who want to create community, show them how to do it, you know, spread the seeds as fast as possible. This is bringing about environmental revolution. It can't be done without a spirituality. And I think that the church, many of the churches are interested, like I told the bishop, boredom is ecumenical, and in worship. And well, that's a wonderful question, and I think the question is what's all important. And that's beautifully put. She says she finds essentially two groups here in Santa Fe: the migrants who come from the industrial world and larger cities, and then the more local people who come from a more natural setting and, if you will, pre-industrial work world. And her question is, what can we do to build a bridge? What kind of rituals can we have to build a bridge between the two groups? And I just want to honor that question. I think the whole answer is in the question. I think that is the question for this community to deal with. I hope someone writes it down carefully and start putting that out there. Letters to the editor and TV talk shows and radio talk shows and gatherings in churches and synagogues and whatever. Because that's a really important question. Rave, and this ritual you got just a trace of here, is essentially an urban movement. It came actually from hip-hop, from black clubs and gay clubs in Chicago and Pittsburgh, and then immediately to Sheffield. And it has definite principles. For example, it's meant to be non-classist. And so you're allowed to wear whatever clothes you want. It's not about being seen in the right clothes. It's not about picking up a date. That's absolutely forbidden. It's not about dating, it's about a spiritual experience. You're dancing to experience a trance, not to impress a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Thirdly, it's not heterosexual or homosexual. It's pluralistic. Everyone's accepted. And those principles are very strong in that movement. But I know music. And may be able to draw on other forms of music that serve their interests. And of course, people from another generation may want to pick up some elements of this but other kinds of music. But don't underestimate, though, the points I made earlier. It's the young who are going to reinvent ritual for us. And if this is their music, which it is, and this is a genius of this group from Sheffield, that rave is the cutting edge of youth art today. And so that's how they created their community. They didn't go to churches to find young people. They went to the cutting edge of the rave art culture. They found artists and invited them in to do less trivial work than just singing in nightclubs. And that is the power of this, is being led, calling on their gifts to help create rituals of listening to each other, hearing one another's stories, and then perhaps creating common forms and metaphors in which to celebrate the new cosmology. Now, I do think that an experience like this for anyone would be terribly important, because this is authentically Western cosmological worship. And while you people here have access to the wonderful Native American cosmological worship, it wouldn't hurt to also see what the West is capable of. And then start your creativity. Well, that's very well put. And strikes and all this until we set education too into a cosmological and a sacred context. Buck Gostor's, this Lakota spiritual teacher, worked with me for several years and now has a center up in the Northwest. Ran into him a year ago. I said, how are things going? Oh, great. He said, they got a lot of invitations to teach in high schools and stuff. Come and speak. I said, great. He said, there's only one problem. He says, I can't use the word Great Spirit when I teach in a high school, public high school. I said, why not? Well, they say the separation of church and state. Well, I said, what do you do? Well, he said, I come in and I teach. And I use the word Great Spirit, and I leave right away, and I never come back to the same high school twice. But recovering the sense of the sacred of the earth is going to be how we reinvent education. And in the process, we have to realize that we are earth. And I think teaching about our bodies and where our bodies come from, this is one way of telling the creation stories. Like Yeats said, take anything, any object, any thought, connect it to its source, and you're there. So take children's bodies and take the history of that body back to the photosynthesis that they ate and drank for breakfast. The sun they drank through photosynthesis. The history of this planet, the supernova explosion that birthed every element in their body. What birthed the supernova explosion? Carry it back. That our European models of education are not working, especially for the more troubled young people. And we're not stuck there. We can reinvent them. That's what I did 18 years ago in starting my program in ICCS. I realized you can't teach spirituality in a system of education that defines truth as clear and distinct ideas, that leaves out the heart, which is in the body and the lower chakras. And so I reinvented this model using artists to teach artist meditation, indigenous people, ritual, and it does work, along with the left brain stuff. Now, I was called in the other day, a month ago, by a man named Carl Anthony, who has been appointed by President Clinton and our congressman there, Ron Dellums, to head the reinvention of the military bases to peace places, because so many military bases in the Bay Area have been closed. So this man, who is an architect and is an African American, is ahead of this committee of 40 people, including 9 mayors. And he called me in because he read my workbook, and he said, you know, our most important need for this committee is ideas, and new ideas. And he said, your book's full of them, so I want to talk to you. Well, make a long story short, he ended by saying that I want to convince this committee of these things you're talking about, including I talked about an entertainment university on one of these military bases, which would be especially for inner city kids, which would begin with the industry of entertainment, which is attractive and holds jobs, but draws on creativity. And all studies show that our toughest kids are very creative. And so we should begin education with creativity. And you begin there, and then the self-discipline follows. And the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic will come once people are motivated to learn through through the creativity that's demanded in that kind of a setting. So he said, well, he said, I want to take this stuff back to these politicians now, but they can't hear the word spirituality. You know, what words can you use for them? Well, I said, what about violence prevention and crime prevention and drug prevention, for starters? He said, yeah, that's language they can listen to, so I'll look you up. But my point is that also internet. I think computers are ways that young people are teaching each other and learning so much. I was with a great educator last night who's been in education for years, a wonderful thinker, and he was saying, you know, what we can now do with computers means this. A young person today, by working a computer, can know everything, which is becoming so god-awful expensive and elitist. So I think that internet and CD-ROMs and other forms of learning are very important breakthroughs in terms of education. I also think multimedia and bringing ritual into the classroom. Not unlike what we're doing. If you can redeem worship this way, you can begin to redeem education this way and make it interesting again. And inviting the young people for whom this language comes so easily to create CD-ROMs and to learn that way, not just by writing papers or taking exams, and to create rituals and so forth. In other words, tapping. That means that as soon as we stop learning, we're dead. And we have to ask how much learning is going on in education. I believe we live in a culture where we have separated religion from spirituality, learning from education, and justice from law. Except for that, we're in great shape. So cosmology, earth, taking our people into earth places, teaching young people gardening, the mystery of growing food again, gratitude, therefore, and reverence for that whole process, the mysteries and reverence for our bodies. Here's a ritual I created with a biophysicist about our bodies. We found 26 photographs of 26 organs of our body. These are new. We only have the new technology to take these pictures the last few years. So we put up a screen, and we have people stand with their shoes off, and we show them the 26 organs, the lungs. So everyone puts their hand on the lung then. And the scientist recites 2 sentences how the lung serves us all day and night so beautifully. And so then we with our hands on the lung, then we bow to the lung, and we chant Deo Gratias, an ancient thank you to God and the lung for its work. We go through 26 organs. At the end of that experience, there's awe in the room. There's silence in the room. And once I did it out in Pennsylvania, after the silence, I said, does anyone want to speak? First guy who spoke, a man stood up. He said, I've been a doctor for 25 years. This is the first time in my life that I've experienced the sacredness of the body. You must take this ritual back to every med school in the country and tell the young people this is why they're becoming doctors. We want to lower health care in our country. That's the way to doctors have to play Wall Street, buy condominiums, golf courses, fill their souls with something because they're not experiencing the sacredness in their work. The same thing applies to teachers who aren't experiencing the sacredness of the mind at work, and politicians, and farmers, and ministers, and priests, and all of it. This is what I mean by reinventing, bringing the sense of the sacred. Second person who spoke after that ritual was a woman, big woman. She stood up, she said, I've been a drug addict, and I've been an alcoholic. If anyone had led me through this ritual when I was a teenager, I never would have abused my body. So I say, part of education. Now I get it. Thank you.
Joy and religion.
And what joy does it give me? That's a good question. It's given me a lot of trouble, I'll tell you. But you know, these young people, repeat the question. This woman says, and listening to me, not just today, but other times, she believes I'm a cultural mediator, and that I bring together disparate groups like men and women, and young and old, and denominations, and so forth, when I speak, and so forth. And she said, how can we do this more as a people, as a culture? How build bridges? And then, and you are a postmodern theologian. That got me scurrying. I've been reading all up about postmodernism since that conversation. And I realized they're right. That what I've been doing for 20 years has a name. I've been doing it by intuition and the seat of my pants, and listening to my anger, and my boredom. And there is a name for it. It's postmodernism. And part of postmodernism, blah, 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 part of postmodernism is to be pluralistic. And not to reject any element of the past, including the modern era, but not to accept it all either, to take what's useful. And I think that's been my journey. I entered the work I did because I wanted to explore mysticism. I wanted to explore experiences of God that I had had as a child. And I felt, well, maybe the Dominican order would be able to help me, which they did for many years. Then I don't know. And it carried me further. But it does give me joy. That is the heart of my joy, is to see people celebrating and reconnecting who haven't done so before. I think that's the essence of all creativity, isn't it? Putting two things together that have not been put together before. Isn't anything else kind of boring? and to see what's new, to give birth. I wrote in one of my early books, 1 + 1 = 3. Everybody knows that. 1 + 1 = 3. You take two things together, take a marriage, for example. The two of you come together, and you give birth to a third thing, a relationship. It's a glory. I said to myself, I was trying to figure it out for days afterwards. I was just kind of in a glow. And I said to myself, well, you know, this is what I set out to do in life, to pray in interesting ways, in ways that work, to encounter the divine, and to be with others, and to teach others, if necessary, to lead them into prayer. And we did that night. There were Buddhists there. Joanna Macy's Buddhist came up and hugged me and kissed me at the end. She said, now I get it. Of course you have to dedicate your life to this thing. Jewish people came up and said they got it. Atheists came up and said they got it. I love it. I love bringing disparate people together, and this is a very postmodern thing to do. I think there's energy there, and it's a very American thing to do. I think of all the pluralistic societies in the world, and all of them are getting that way, even England. And he asked for the language. The primary language is cosmology, ritual. We were all in a space that was bigger than us, more sacred than any one of our identities. You know, part of postmodernism, Walter Truett Anderson, the sociologist, says, in postmodern times, all of us have to write after our name, ETC, period. We are becoming conscious of how many things we are. No one has it all, and no one is all bad. We got our etc. And this is an age of the etc. And we can't do it without cosmology. Let me tell you a concrete story about this. This is where I learned it. 2 years ago, when Tom Berry and Brian Swim were writing their book, The Universe Story, kinds of big names, 30 of us gathered for 3 days to discuss their manuscript. They wanted feedback on us. Well, at the end of the 3 days together, we went around the table asking how people felt about it. About half the people said the same thing, that they had never been together with people of such, renown and identity and all this, who didn't fight. And where egos weren't beating up each other. I happened to be the last one in the circle to speak, and I commented on a comment that one comment was, and I said, the reason is that we were discussing the universe. The universe can absorb tremendous egos. Whether that ego be a personal ego, or an ethnic ego, or a religious ego, or a cultural ego. Once we reset our relationships in the context of the universe, it's going to be a different ballgame. And that's what happens Sunday night, I think. And that should happen every Sunday, or if you prefer worship on Saturday or Friday, do it then. That is what should happen. That's what Sabbath means. Not that we're honoring a petty little formula of praying to our private little God, but what you're doing in Sabbath is honoring creation itself. And in that context, we're all players, we're all priests, and we're all receivers of the mutual sacrament that the universe is. We're all in communion. And as soon as our species gets that, then we'll dance to our diversity. We'll honor the diversity. It has honored God's imagination to create people so... Okay, the point made is that he quit his job recently and he found it a rather cutthroat place, people very insecure. Now he's in a place where there's real possibility to create your own business, create your own work, and he wonders how to help these kind of people who are stuck in jobs and are kind of internalizing their own oppression in the work and kind of living this unhealthy and cutthroat existence. Then he also asked about the Creative Spirituality magazine.
Well, bureaucracy, by the way.
Bureaucracy, yeah. Well, just the last question. I don't know, are there creation magazines sent here? So there are some available here, or flyers or something? Pardon? The Ark bookstore has a magazine. Okay, Creation Spirituality magazine. And? Okay.
It's around.
And the church has it too, the Church of Religious Science. Great. So it's around, but also if you pick up one of our ICCS flyers, are they here? Those flyers aren't here? Goodness heavens. Well, well, that tells about our program, and you could contact us there too. The number would be 510-436-1000. That would be the number of the school, Holdings College. Tell about the master's degree program we do. 510-436-1000. So you ask for ICCS, Institute of Culture and Creative Spirituality, and they could answer questions about the magazine or send you information about our 9-month master's program in Culture and Creative Spirituality. Now, a question. I would think there are many ways. One, of course, is to create base communities outside office time where allies at work feel the kind of heart issues that you've dealt with, and they can come and talk and process and grieve and create and do that inner work that's necessary for them to either maintain their souls at that place of work or get the courage up to leave. I would think that would be one way. Another would be, say, our churches and synagogues could have discussion groups about work. How are people doing at work? How is your soul at work? Not just how is your soul on Sunday, how is it at work? And then I think that could be very interesting to process that. One thing I do in this book at the end, I have a questionnaire, I don't know, about 32 questions or something that you can ask that kind of, I think, would be interesting to pass that questionnaire around some of these workplaces about how things are going for your inner life at work and for our outer work. I suppose getting on internet and raising these questions too would be an idea. Writing letters to the editors of newspapers, getting on the radio raising these questions, telling your story. I mean, that's the point, telling your story, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Your story, I find, is very similar to that woman in Washington, D.C. that I spoke about, that you often have to have the courage to quit to find the alternative. And so I'm talking about support groups. I mean, we have support groups for people who are battered at many levels of life. Maybe we need support groups for people who are the truth. I do think if we started doing this, that the salaries we give our ball players will go down. It's all over. Or one more. One more?
One more?
One more? One more question. How do we deliver recognition? How do we deliver recognition in a postmodern era, in a culture that, can we find ways to honor one another and to recognize one another besides just the dollar bill and salaries? My experience is that you honor one another by asking them to teach you. And maybe we need to ask housewives and parents, you know, what they learn from parenting and householding, and house husbands for that matter too. I know that's true of indigenous people. When I first worked in Australia, we did a 5-day summer program, and I told the Australians, now be sure to hire some indigenous people to teach. And there was an indigenous couple who taught us that week, and at the end of the week, they stood in front of the whole group and they said, this is the first time in our lives that we've been asked to teach white people. I was just astounded. And they cried. Tears came down their cheeks. I mean, they were so moved. It's such a simple thing to ask people to teach you. Heterosexuals should ask homosexuals to teach them what they've learned about life, what wisdom they have. That's how you break down differences. That question that came from over there. We all, if we're still learning, if we still want to learn, then those who are different from us should be asked to teach us. So that's one way of reckoning. What part of the Mass is this little fellow with white hair sticking up, punk hair, and rings in his nose, got up in the middle of the Mass and did this incredible dance with strobe lights on him and everything. I was just so blown away and moved by it. And here he was dancing in San Francisco in front of 350 Americans, a blue-collar kid from the streets of Sheffield, England. And in the context of worship, the sacred context of the community, he doesn't need any more recognition than that. I mean, it's an honor to be able to bring forth your gifts in the context of worship. And that's what our more circle-oriented forms of worship will allow to happen. The very way we have churches built, they're built like this stage. There's someone up here who has all the goods, and everyone else is back there. It's very hard to be recognized. Maybe, you know, individuals might come up. That's not the point. It's like that rock stage. It's about heroes. Whereas to get back to the circle, again, that we all have something to give. We all are a unique expression, even in our DNA, a unique expression of the cosmic Christ, of the divine image. And that is what we want to honor ultimately, and what we want to make spaces for honoring. And that is one of the great works of ritual. And one reason we don't have authentic ways of recognition is that we don't have healthy ritual. So I think that.
I'm Bill O'Donnell. Tell us the background, how you decided to, what made you decide to bring Matt to town?
2 years ago, Santa Fe and the whole state of New Mexico experienced a devastating event, and several of the priests in the archdiocese being accused and found guilty of pedophilia. And this shook the entire spiritual community. I had been taught by some of these priests, and being part of the clergy, found myself in great distress as to what to do about that. And in being an answer to some prayer that I did was the guidance to ask Matthew to come, and thus began a 2-year quest of letters and pleads and a serious commitment on the part of our church to do whatever it would take to bring Matthew here. And it was he or his staff chose Santa Fe over 250 requests to have him up here. And so this appearance was the answer to much prayer, and clearly a much needed situation, a healing that needed to happen in our community and in our whole state.
In retrospect, we can see now the wisdom of that, but I'm really curious in the way of supporting people out there who are trying to develop programming. What was it? What were the seeds that worked? Why Matthew Fox in the Church of Religious Science? And after all, he'd been all these years a Roman Catholic Dominican priest, 30 years, just now on the threshold of joining technically the Episcopal Church to continue his ministry. So give us a little background about that.
Well, a particular focus or a particular name on spirituality, but I think he speaks to people of all callings. People that connect themselves with a sense of self, with a sense of spirit. And that was what first appealed to me. And obviously that's in retrospect. When it happened in an intuitive, almost mystical level that, I mean, I didn't hear it as a voice, but the message came to me very strong. This is the person that can assist this community with this, what is clearly a devastating circumstances. And after that was establishing a commitment to make that happen, to be willing to do whatever it would take to bring this man here and to be restless in that pursuit, and it paid off. I think we must have connected with their staff at some level that they realized that we would not let it go, that we were going to stay persistent until we got an answer. And they did. They got the message, and we got him.
That's great. So you're a crossover person yourself, I take it?
Yes. My background is I was raised a Catholic, and now pursuing a much broader sense of spirit.
But you're an ordained now minister in the Church of Religious Science.
Exactly.
How do you experience that in Santa Fe? Is that a comfortable situation for you? Do you find this a supportive environment for your spirituality and what you teach?
Mm-hmm. Santa Fe is wonderful for this. Our particular teachings, though, within the context of a different thought, and that's the thing that attracted me to religious sciences, that it leaves an open door to speak from and teach from. I use the liturgy that we use is a universal liturgy, and I'm very appreciative and thankful that there is a structure that allows for that kind of diversity in our society.
And you're serving all of us by bringing Father Fox in, no matter what denomination. Right. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to come, I'll bring your attention to Crosswinds magazine of November 1994. There's an article here about Matt Fox that will tell a little bit about what he talked about today in reinventing work. So I draw your attention to it.
I was very excited by his call for ritual, and particularly ritual that will begin to enfranchise the young people. I know that personally what I do in my church is very appealing for folks who are 30 and above, but I have not yet been successful in developing some medium through which young people can be attracted. And some of the propositions that he has made in bringing a multimedia presentation to ritual and spirituality is very appealing. And I'm going to go back and address this with my board of directors and see how we can facilitate some form of that at our church.
My first visit to your church was actually before your time, and it was to a dance. In the Church of Religious Science.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a possible venue for a certain kind of dance?
Indeed, very much so. It fall in place and the thing happens, just like the way that this event happened. It all begins with an idea, and for me an idea was born here that I am very interested in and planning to pursue and do the work that it takes to make it happen.
You know it's been done.
I'm a Celtic and Native.
Great combination.
We want to charter a plane.
Yeah,
right.
We interviewed Ann.
Great. Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Since I know it's going to be on.
No, we hope it'll be the first Sunday of June, but that depends on getting greeting cord, raising money, getting a place, all those things. But we'd love to have you. Stay in touch.
We don't need but not charter a plane, but get a group. Great if there were like at least 15. But if we could charter. All right. That would be great.
Parents
Because I could get my son to go directly.
No, that's of course they got the link.
And I decided rather than driving hours.
I keep telling my sons, I say, it's up to you to solve it. We made a mess, and we'll help you.
You can help. There you can go.
Thank you.
Okay.